First Year, Part 3, The Grand Feast. A.M. Ashwin. I looked down at the table. It was suddenly lined with all kinds of food. All the plates that had been empty only seconds before were now filled with all varieties of food. The students immediately began eating in delight. I looked down at my plate. I didn't feel hungry at all, but I picked up my fork, spooning mashed potatoes into my mouth slowly, merely for something I could do with myself. The food was delicious. All the students around me had begun to talk to each other. The first years introduced themselves to each other and started laughing and talking amongst themselves like they'd known each other long before today. No one tried to introduce themselves to me though, and I didn't introduce myself to anyone either. I felt too nervous and too self-conscious. The boy named Sirius Black, who had been sitting next to me, in the beginning, had gotten up and went to sit by James, Peter, and Remus as soon as the feast had begun. James had tried to sit with the red-headed girl, Lily, but she had gotten up and sat next to a brown-haired girl named Alice something. They had immediately begun talking and laughing together. All the students sat close together, but the two students who were seated on either side of me were sitting as far from me as they could, talking to the children next to them. I felt like crying, but I kept an emotionless mask plastered on my face as I ate. Halfway through the meal the ghosts which we had met earlier all came into the great hall, flying about and talking to the students. A brown-haired boy suddenly came over, seating himself next to me. He looked like he was a first-year student, and he looked a bit nervous. I noticed he had a combination of a pink, blue, and orange cloud that surrounded him: tenderness, caring, smart, courage, and humor. "Hello," he said, smiling timidly at me. "My name's Frank Longbottom. What's your name?" I looked at him surprised that he was talking to me. "My name is Alexa Carrington," I replied quietly. "Why are you all alone over here, if you don't mind me asking, Alexa?" he asked. He genuinely seemed to want to know the answer. It didn't appear he was trying to be mean by asking. "No one seems to like me," I replied honestly. My bottom lip began to tremble, and I looked down at my lap. "I think the other children think I'm strange, or they're scared of me, you know, because of my eye and my leg. I'm surprised you're talking to me, Frank." Frank shrugged and seemed to relax a little. "You look like you could use a friend, and I would like to be just that," he said smiling. "Besides, I think your eyes are quite lovely. They're not the usual, and that's what makes them look so unique." "Thank you," I said, beaming up at him. I don't know if he meant it, but it was nice of him to say nonetheless. That's the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. "I would like to be your friend too, Frank." He smiled back at me and held out his hand to shake. I took his hand. "Friends then?" he said. I nodded my head emphatically. "Friends," I said, smiling. "You gonna eat those?" he asked, pointing to the 2 rolls on my plate. "No," I said, "I'm not very hungry. You can have them if you want." Frank grabbed the rolls from my plate and bit into one. The food here is delicious," he said between mouthfuls. I laughed as he stuffed the second roll whole into his mouth, his cheeks bulging. After we all got done eating, the plates all cleared themselves and became sparkling clean again. Then a long row of all kinds of desserts appeared. There were all sorts of cakes, ice creams of every flavor imaginable, puddings, jello, donuts, and a lot of things I didn't even recognize. "Oh, I wish I had a boy's appetite and could fit more food into my stomach," I said in a wistful tone to Frank, who had stuffed a chocolate cupcake in his mouth. "You are lucky, Alexa," he said, after he'd finished eating the cupcake. "You won't have to deal with a stomach ache like the rest of us who are stuffing ourselves with desserts." "I suppose you're right," I said. "But I do wish I could try just a little bit of every dessert here. They all look so tasty, I can't decide on just one." From a few seats down I heard a boy, who I saw to be James Potter, exclaim, "Couldn't they have told us there would be all these desserts before we all filled up on the dinner? I don't think I can fit another thing into my stomach." "I don't think I can fit any more in my stomach either, mate," Sirius Black said, "but I'm not gonna let that stop me from trying." From where Frank and I sat, we saw Sirius scooping piles of ice cream, cake, and some rice pudding onto his plate until the plate was nearly overfilling onto the table. He then proceeded to stuff it all into his mouth like there was no tomorrow. "Oi!" James said, "don't eat all of the desserts before we can get to it." Sirius's face was smeared with chocolate ice cream as he glanced up at James and said, "You want some? Here you go then." Sirius took one of the cream pies from the table. In one swift motion, he slammed it into James' stunned face. The whole Gryffindor table burst into laughter, Sirius amongst the loudest of the laughing students. I couldn't help but join in on the laughter when I saw James' face. James sat for a moment, an incredulous, indignant look on his face. James seemed to snap out of it after a moment, and he took a bowl of pudding and dumped it all over Sirius' head. Now it was Sirius' turn to look shocked. James fell out of his chair laughing so hard, and Remus had tears running down his face from laughter. I chuckled at Sirius's expression. Peter helped James up off the floor, and before anyone knew it, there was a full-out food fight amongst the four boys. Soon, other students joined in on the fun. Frank looked at me. "You wanna join?" he asked hopefully. I shook my head. "You go," I said, "I don't want to get dirty." He didn't look like he believed me, but he went to join the food war without arguing. I might have joined in on the food fight too, but I don't think they would have welcomed me. These boys and other students all seemed to be friends, and they didn't appear to like me. James threw a glob of mashed potatoes at Sirius, who ducked behind the red-haired girl named Lily. The mashed potatoes hit her on her shoulder, and she gave James Potter the most scathing glare I had ever seen. She got up from her chair and started yelling at James. "How dare you? That was disgusting. Stop all of this right now. All of you." James stuttered over his words, laughing slightly. Sorry Lily. I meant to hit Sirius. Sirius, who had grabbed a bowl of some kind of liquid from the table, dumped it all over Lily from behind. Lily gasped in shock as the orange liquid poured down on her. She turned round and faced Sirius in one quick motion. At the look on the girl's face, Sirius burst into fits of laughter. Lily didn't seem to find it very funny though. She clenched her jaw tightly. Sirius' laughter seemed to make her just snap. She slapped Sirius right in the face. All the laughing Gryffindors quieted, and the few who had been throwing food stopped in surprise. Sirius Black and James Potter both have identical looks of shock plastered on their faces. Before anything could get out of control though, McGonagall came over. "Miss Evans, control yourself. And as for you boys," she said looking at James and Sirius. "You and Miss Evans will all serve a detention in my office this Tuesday afternoon." She glared down at the three of them. But, Lily stuttered. McGonagall turned her back and went back to sit at the teacher's table. James ran his hands through his hair, making it messier than it already was, and smiled at Lily sheepishly. Lily sent him a glare and sat back down with the girl named Alice, and buried her face in her hands. Alice patted her on the back consolingly and glared at Sirius and James. James and Sirius went back over to where Remus and Peter sat. Sirius muttered something about redheads and their tempers to James. Frank Longbottom came back over to me and sat down. He was covered from head to toe in food. "That was crazy," he said in a breathless, happy-sounding voice. "Yeah," I agreed. "Oi, Frank." A boy sitting a few seats down from us called out. Frank looked over at him. "Come sit with us." A girl next to the boy called out, giving me a nasty look. Frank looked at them and then back at me, unsure. "Go ahead," I said, forcing a smile. "All right, but we're still friends?" he asked jokingly. "Yes," I said smiling, a genuine smile now. He went over, sitting in between the girl and the boy who had called him, and he laughed at something they said. I noticed how alone I was again. Shortly after, the desserts were all cleared away from the table. Dumbledore rose from the table, and the hall grew silent as he cleared his throat to speak. "Now that we are all fed and watered, I have a few start-of-term notices to give you." He looked around the tables full of students. "First years should know that entering the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all of the students, for it is full of dangerous creatures. Some of our older students should do well to remember this as well. Dumbledore's eyes flashed in the direction of two red-haired boys who looked to be in their 6th or 7th year. They looked back at him with identical innocent looks. Quidditch trials will be held in the 2nd week of the term. Continued Dumbledore, anyone interested in playing for their house teams, should contact Madam Hooch. And last but not least, I would like to remind all the pupils that the Great Lake is not a place that I would recommend swimming in, Dumbledore said, giving the two red-haired boys another look, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes and a slight smile on his lips. Some of our students forget this valuable advice last year, and were nearly eaten alive by the giant squid that currently reigns in the Great Lake. A few of the professors coughed, and I was sure they were trying to hide laughter. Now, before we all must go to bed, let us all sing the school song, he announced. Dumbledore swished his wand. A long golden ribbon flew out of it and rose high above the tables, twisting itself into words. Everyone may pick their favorite tune to sing the words along to, Dumbledore said. Here we go. All the students began to sing the words to the song that was inscribed on the ribbon. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts. Teach us something please. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling with some interesting stuff. For now, they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we've forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest. And learn until our brains all rot. Everybody sang the song in different tunes, and we all finished the song at different times. I sang it to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Well, I attempted to. The last to finish was Sirius Black and James Potter, who were both left singing in high and then low voices. James made his voice pitch so high that Sirius had to stop singing due to his gales of laughter. James' face colored a little, but he bowed dramatically when a few of the students clapped at his performance. When the song finally ended, Dumbledore rose and began to clap. The rest of the students and teachers followed his example, standing and clapping loudly. And now, bedtime for the lot of you, Dumbledore said. Everyone stood, and Gryffindor Prefect led all the first-year Gryffindors through the crowds of students. As we left, I glanced over at the Slytherin table. Aileen was also following a Slytherin Prefect, and just before she disappeared out of sight, she glanced up at me. I smiled at her. She stared back at me, her face not revealing any emotions. Author's note. I hope you like this. Please tell me what you thought, D.